It's been quite a journey. I think listeners should be aware that the accident that caused my near-death experience was actually 27 years ago. It's been almost 3 decades. And I bring that up because I can speak of it now. I could not even speak of it for almost 10 years because so much went on, and it was personal and it was painful, and yet now we're at a place where I can speak openly about it, and I'll answer any questions you have. But my near-death experience was caused by an automobile accident, and it's been many years ago, as I've outlined. We were on a family vacation. The whole family was in the car. It was me, my wife, and our 2 young sons. And we had had a lovely vacation. We had driven from northern Utah to southern Utah, and it was about a 5-hour trip. But we were heading back. It was Monday morning. It was the Monday after Easter holiday. And we were coming back. And gosh, I had loaded all the bags in the car. I had put the children in their car seats. My wife had gotten in the car. We had said our goodbyes. And we were ready to head home. And I was just pulling away from the curb. And interesting enough, her parents, who had been visiting, they were on the porch kind of waving goodbye as grandmas and grandpas do. And as I began to pull away, my wife said, "Stop, wait." And I thought she may have forgotten something. And I stopped the car and I looked at her and she said, "I just want to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time." Now, in that moment, I thought, oh gosh, women, we've loaded the car, we're ready to go, and I loved her madly. So I stopped and I said, "Okay, you run and go say goodbye one more time." But I watched and I noticed as she ran up to the porch where they were, and she not only hugged them both, but she kissed them. And I observed that. I watched it, and that was not unordinary. And yet, as the day played out, that was the last goodbye. So I noticed that. And I bring that up because, gosh, I think we all get those whispers, those little premonitions, those feelings, those thoughts. I'm just going to go say goodbye one more time to Mom and Dad. And she did, and she ran back and joyfully jumped in the car and buckled herself in, and we were off. I took the car out on the interstate. I put the cruise control up to 75 miles an hour, which is as fast as I could legally go. I was hurrying. It's like I want to get back. I'm missing a day's work. Our minds do this thing. I was all caught up in what was happening and what I was missing and what I would have to take care of and make up for. And I was very happy and joyful, but I was in that to-do list state of mind. And an interesting thing happened to me as I was in that state. I happened to just look in the rearview mirror just to see where traffic was. And as I did so, and it's a moment, it's a glance. It's it's a glance, but as I glanced to see where traffic was, I noticed my youngest son, Griffin, in his car seat, and he had fallen sound asleep. And I thought, what a beautiful boy. What a blessing. There he is. We were told we might not have more children, and he was our second son. And I noticed details. I just noticed how long his eyelashes were and how peacefully he was sleeping. And then I heard my oldest son, Spencer, and he was playing with action figures, and making all this joyful noise of a little boy. And I looked over at my wife, and she also had reclined her seat back and was sound asleep. But she was still holding on to my hand. And, here in a moment, it was a moment, I had this profound feeling of gratitude. Like, wow, here's the miracle child that we didn't know would ever come. Here's my oldest son playing, and here's my wife who is sleeping peacefully but still holding my hand. 10 years of marriage and 2 children and our careers, and she was still holding my hand like she did on that first date, when I had some extra money and took her to the movies. And it was a profound moment of gratitude. Like, wow, look at what I'm surrounded with. And I'm driving on, and of course, my attention went back to the road, and I was driving, and it was probably about an hour after that everything came undone. And there was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of a red pickup truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. One of the most difficult parts of the story, perhaps, is I believe I may have just nodded off, just dozed off at the wheel slightly. And, of course, I was a young father. I was working those long, 12, 14-hour days to provide and protect and make a living. But I believe I may have just dozed off, and when I did, I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and I lost control of the car. And the car began to roll, not off the road, but down the road on the hard concrete at 75 miles per hour. And it was a horrific accident. The accident reports say the car probably rode no less than 6 or 8 times at that speed and with the propulsion of the hard road. I blacked out for the actual rolling. I mean, I was aware, oh my goodness, we're crashing, but it's like I blacked out. But when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old, Spencer, crying hysterically in the back seat. Here he is, my child is crying. And as a father, I thought, I've got to get to my boy. I have got to get to my son. And that's when I realized that I couldn't move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. I was struggling to breathe. I was experiencing pain, but the adrenaline, I've got to get to my son. I was not aware of my injuries, but what had actually happened is I had extensive injuries. I mean, both of my legs had been crushed. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back had been damaged in 2 places. My rib cage had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been completely torn off. And then the seat belt had cut through and ruptured all my insides. I was physically a mess, severe physical trauma. I was unaware of any of that. All I knew is my son's crying. I've got to get to my boy. But that's when I realized that no one else was crying. That's when the brutal reality hit that my wife and my youngest son were gone, and they were killed instantly in the accident. And I won't go into the details of what that was like and what I witnessed and what I saw and what I knew. I mean, briefly, just for context, my youngest son's car seat had broken apart, so it didn't hold him in properly, and it took his life. My wife, Tamara, because she had reclined her seat, the seatbelt didn't restrain her properly, and so she had experienced, head trauma that took her life. It was horrible. It was the darkest. It was the darkest place I suppose a person could ever be. I mean, here I am as a father. I've got a hysterical child in the back seat. I can't move. I can't get to him. I know at the scene, and I'm aware that half the family has passed. They're gone. And I was driving the car. I mean, the guilt, the regret. It was like, can't I get these 2 seconds back? What happened? Did I fall asleep? I mean, it was the absolute panic. And I set that up just for context. It was a very dark and desperate place. And yet it was in that space that I felt light come. In this despair, in the horror of what had happened, I felt light. Light came to me. It's like light surrounded me. It was tangible. It was light like a blanket holding me, comforting me, and then it felt as if I was risen above the accident scene, and suddenly I could breathe, and the pain was gone, and I was a little bit confused about how can I be okay? What has happened here? And as I'm just coming to terms with how am I okay? How can I breathe? And what is this light? My wife, Tamara, who I knew was deceased at the scene, there she was in the light with me. And she wasn't injured. She was gorgeous. She was beautiful. She was radiant. She was right there, and we began to converse. We began to talk. She kept saying, Jeff, you can't come. You can't come. You've got to go back. You've got to go back. You can't be here. And there's this panic and yet this comfort in the light. And we literally had this conversation about if I stayed with her, our little 7-year-old, my oldest son, would be orphaned. And she was like, we can't leave him. And somehow she knew she couldn't come back. But she said, you've got to go back. Somehow I had that ability or that choice. And boy, that was a big decision. Here I was looking at the woman I loved more than life. And yet I had a son, in the backseat of that car that I knew was going to be okay. And we made a choice. We made a deal. We agreed that I would come back and that I would raise our son. And boy, I believe that's the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. But there I was, embraced, holding my wife, and we made the decision that I would come back. And it's interesting how powerful our thoughts are. I mean, I didn't have to figure out, well, how do I go back? I mean, it was the intention, it was the thought, it was the decision. I'm going back. I'm going back. And then, whoosh, I mean, it was like I was just whisked away. And I found myself moving about a very busy emergency room, level 1 trauma center. And I was aware almost in a 360 awareness. I was aware of the doctors and the nurses and the patients and even the families of the patients. I had this expanded awareness. And I have no concept of time in the bubble of light. I mean, what I later found out is people arrived at the scene, emergency services were called. They were able to see to Spencer, my oldest son, and he was banged up a little bit. He had broken his arm and he had bruised ribs, but he basically physically walked away from the accident. I had to be extricated from the car. The extent of my injuries, I had to be airlifted or life-flighted, to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I was unaware of any of that. I knew I had wrecked the car. I knew half the family had passed. I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say, and now here I was moving about the hospital, aware, acutely aware of the doctors, the nurses, the patients, for instance, a nurse passed by me. They were completely unaware of me. And in an instant, I knew everything about her. I knew her life. There was this oneness, this connectedness, this knowing. I experienced, as she passed, I knew her life. I experienced her life. I knew her soul. I experienced the abuse that she had received as a child, the abuse as a child. And yet in that same instant, here she is, helping, healing, working, serving in the hospital. Everyone I saw, there was this profound magnificence, like, wow, look at them. Look at the beauty of their soul, of their heart, of what they're doing, of what they're creating. And even the awareness of, if someone was struggling or having thoughts, I was aware of it, but I knew the motivation, I knew the love, I knew the hate, I knew them as if they were myself. I was completely connected to them. And I had grown up in a conservative Christian home. Even a biblical verse came to me, which was interesting. The verse was the famous verse where Jesus says, "Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of one of these, you've done it unto me," which I had believed was a nice verse about being nice, but there was this profound depth of, oh my goodness, I am them. They are me. What Jesus was saying is, I am the man in prison. I am the stranger on the street that just wants acceptance. I am the beggar. And there was this depth, a new meaning to everything I thought I believed. And then I finally came upon a body or a man, laying on the gurney that I didn't feel anything from, which was really odd, given the connected, oneness that I was experiencing with everyone I saw. So I stepped closer to look, and that's when I realized, oh my goodness, that is me. But it's not me. I'm having this profound connected oneness experience, but there's my body. There's my skin suit. There's the tabernacle of clay, if you will. I mean, and it was so. There was this profound sadness. My body was in such trauma, so many injuries, and yet there was this complete reverence. I'm looking at the body thinking, wow, what a miraculous machine. I took it for granted. I never thought about, I don't have to remind my heart to beat. I don't have to think about my lungs breathing at my body. I mean, I don't have to teach my eyes how to see. I was completely connected to the complete miracle, the miraculous machine that the body is. And yet mine was so broken. And I knew I was to get back in it. It's like, well, I made this deal. I gave my word. I told my wife I'd come back and raise our boy. I got to get back in. I got to get back in there. And once again, I didn't have to figure out how. It was the intention. I'm going back in. And then, boom, then back into the body. The trauma, the injuries, the guilt, the regret, the panic, and the pain of all of it. Suddenly I was back, and I had been ventilated. They'd put a tube down my throat to do the breathing from my lungs, which had collapsed, and my legs were obviously immobile because they had both been crushed. My right arm was immobile because of the injuries, and they eventually tied down my left hand because I kept grabbing at all the medical equipment. And there I was. I just, it gave a whole new meaning to the words, be still, because I had no choice. And the trauma, and then contemplating what had happened, like, wow, this connection, this goodbye, this I was out of the body, my soul had been out of my body, and now it's back into the physical experience, and there was so much to it. And I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. I mean, I had 18 surgeries in all before I was put back together. And I learned a lot. I experienced a lot in the hospital. There was times I felt like my soul had left my body again briefly, like it just needs a break. It's like I would be in the corner of the room watching things go on, but I was still connected to the body, and I was never pronounced dead, in those moments, but I realized this separation and yet this keen connection of the spirit or the soul and the body, with this reverence for the body of, I've got to heal. I've got to get better. I made this deal with my wife to come and raise our son. And it was a profound experience. I had so much support. I was so lucky. I was so blessed. I mean, my family, my brothers were there by my side. They practically lost their jobs to come and look out for me, and my parents, my friends, my workmates. I mean, everyone was so supportive, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about love. I learned a lot about love. There was even a nurse, and there was many nurses. The nurses were like earth angels. But one of the nurses would linger at night, and she would come back in. And she would say, can I work on you for a minute? And I'm like, work on me doing what? Are we going to have more needles and blood? And but she would just gently hold my head, and she would hold my one foot that was left. They had amputated the left leg, and I didn't know what she was doing at the time. I'm now very aware she was doing Reiki. She was doing energy work, but I knew how it made me feel. I knew how it was so healing, and I felt so much love and connection, not necessarily to the nurse, but to all of it, to the divine, to me, to my loved ones. It was a profound experience that way too, and so that was very unique. There's also one more thing I'll share about the hospital before we move into more out-of-body experiences, but when I was airlifted or life-flighted into the hospital, there was a doctor and a nurse that had a profound experience. And Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, who was the attending ER physician, a very credible clinician, he's actually written a book about this and about many of his experiences in the ER. It's called Not Yet, but he experienced, as they life-flighted me in, and there was a whole team of surgeons working on me. He didn't have to really be engaged, so he was observing. And he says that as they brought me into the arena, the operating room, whatever you call it, that suddenly my wife, who was deceased at the scene, she had been pronounced dead at the scene, he said there she was in the operating room, and he could see her. And he said she seemed to be suspended, she seemed to be in the air, above your gurney, and he said she communicated with him. And a nurse witnessed the same thing. But I was so moved when he told me this. We've actually become good friends because they didn't know me. They didn't know me. They didn't know I had had a out-of-body or near-death experience. But they felt important. He felt inspired to come share what had happened to them. Both he and the nurse came and told me what had happened to them in the operating room, which was probably not very orthodox and not very common. But when he said she had communicated with him, I said, "What did she say?" And he kind of teared up and he said, "She simply shared her gratitude for what we were doing to save your life." And I burst into tears. I was like, how? They didn't know that I'd made this deal. They didn't know that we'd had this conversation. I had not shared my experience with anyone at that point except my mother and my younger brother. And anyway, that was a profound and unique experience. And Dr. Raymond Moody has written about it as well, saying, wow, here's a situation where I'm having a near-death experience. And I know the skeptics would say, well, the oxygen cut off to your brain, you begin to hallucinate. But here was a doctor and a nurse, very credible clinicians, having a profound experience at the same time. And they weren't losing oxygen to their brain. They weren't injured. And yet that window, that veil, that thing, they were able to see and witness what the other realm, the other side, as my wife had somehow wound up at the hospital to look over me, to look over my care. And so the hospital was a very unique and powerful experience that included some of the clinicians that have been willing and courageous enough to talk about it. Perhaps the most profound experience came at the end of my hospital stay. I mean, I was in ICU for months. I mean, I would be in ICU, I would come out of ICU, I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge in your lungs. I would go back into ICU. The infections were horrible given how my insides had all been ruptured and they had to leave those wounds open. It was, Sabrina, it was horrible. It was really traumatic. But at the end of my hospital stay, when I'm finally out of ICU, I'm out of surgical recovery, I'm out of the regular hospital room. I'm in the rehabilitation wing. I'm still staying there full time and sleeping there and everything, but gosh, I'm getting ready to come home. They're teaching me how to deal with the colostomy bag, how to get dressed with one arm because, my left leg is amputated. My right leg is in a brace sticking straight out. My right arm is in a sling, which I can't use, and so they're attempting to get me sufficient enough to come home. with only the use of one arm and one hand. And it was at that time that I had perhaps the most profound out-of-body or near-death experience. I was finally able to sleep on my side. They had stabilized all my abdominal injuries, and I was able to sleep on my side, which was my natural way of sleeping. I had laid so long on my back, I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. I was bald on the back of my head, and my brothers were giving me a bad time about that, and they were so good. We even found times to laugh in all of it. And this night I laid on my side and I fell into a deep sleep. And yet as I slept, I was aware that the light came. I felt that light come again, just like at the scene of the accident. This light came and it surrounded me, and it was the same feeling of comfort and peace, and it felt as if I was rising above the hospital bed. I had been in such grief. I mean, there was not only the physical trauma, the emotional grief of having half the family pass, and the fact that I was driving the car, that was so heavy. I mean, it's almost like the physical stuff was simply a distraction. The emotional grief was far greater, and I'd been in so much grief. And yet here I am feeling that comfort again, that peace, that light. And I rise above the hospital bed. But this time the light goes away. It like dispenses. It like fades away. Like fog off a lake is the best way to describe it. It dispensed. And I was in the most beautiful place. People say heaven or the other side or the spirit world. The only word that comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I was home. I mean, it felt so familiar. It felt so welcoming. And I was whole. I had both legs and both feet. And I began to run. And it was such a physical experience. It's difficult to explain because I could feel, I felt the energy of the ground under my feet. I felt the intelligence in my calves and thighs, and I'm thinking I'm home, and I'm whole, and I'm running, and I'm healed, and there was this joyful, gleeful, blissful feeling of I'm home, and I'm whole, I'm okay, I'm healed, and then there was this knowing, this message I wasn't there to stay. And at the same time, there was this corridor off to my left, and I knew intuitively, I'm to go that way. So I began to go down the corridor. And at the end of the corridor was a crib, which I found odd. But my son Griffin, my little boy, he was only 14 months old. He was still sleeping in a crib at the time of the accident. He was a toddler. And so I was intrigued by this crib, and so I ran down to the end of the corridor. And when I looked in the crib, there was my little boy. There was Griffin, and he was sleeping as beautifully and as peacefully as when I'd glanced in the rearview mirror. It was like all the time had just accordioned, and there he was, sleeping peacefully. And again, I noticed these details of what a beautiful boy he was. Look how long his eyelashes were. That was my thought. And I mean, as a father, I swept up my son. And that was physical too. I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child, but you have, okay. There's a weight, there's a heat, like everything. And I felt him, and he was solid against me, and I could feel him breathing, and I could feel his breath on my neck. And I leaned over and I smelled his hair. Everything that we experience in this realm, I was experiencing it, but like multiplied, like it was a physical, sensory experience. And I began to weep, thinking, wow, he's okay. And as I was holding him, I felt this presence coming up behind me. And gosh, it was so overwhelming. It was so powerful. It was so cosmic. It was so wise. And I'm holding my little boy, and my upbringing, I was thinking, that's God. That's God. And then the guilt started to bubble up. I thought, I'm in so much trouble. I mean, I crashed the car. My little boy's here because I overcorrected or I fell asleep, and his life was cut short because and the presence is coming closer and closer, and I'm feeling all these emotions and all this guilt, and suddenly the presence is right behind me. I can feel it, and I don't dare turn around. And I had this thought thinking, that's the divine, that's God. And I had this thought, I hope I can be forgiven. I hope I can be forgiven. And I'm holding my child. And with that thought, and this felt physical too, these divine arms just wrapped around it and held both of us. And then it's like just this download of love and peace and truth and beauty and clarity. It was just like this download came, and here I'd had the thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And the first information, and there was words spoken, but the communication was through my whole soul, and it was like, there's nothing to forgive. I'm thinking, I hope I can be forgiven. There was all this love saying, there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in divine order. Now, I had the thought, how can that be? Here I am arguing with God. How can that be? How's it in divine order? He's here. And then I saw my life. My life began to play out. I remember as a child in the cartoons, they'd say, well, my life flashed before my eyes, and it was almost like that. I've learned it's called the life review, but I was seeing my life. I saw my parents divorce and split up. I saw the insecurities that caused in me as a child. Like, I better get the grade, I better make the team, I better get the girl and get the job, and that was all. But there was this beauty to it. I saw things and I thought, well, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And here the divine is holding me saying, yeah, but what did you learn? What did you learn? There was no judgment. There was no comparison. There was this overwhelming love. Just asking the questions, what did you learn? And it's like, well, yeah, I learned this and this and this. And then I would see, I'd say, well, that was wrong. And I knew it was wrong. And I did it anyway. I'm having this conversation with myself in many ways, but with the divine. And it's almost like we had become one. And when I said that was wrong and I did it anyway, the beautiful God that held me said, well, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. I mean, it was almost multiplied, because here I am holding my child. And to me, he is perfect, and he is beloved, and he is, all of that. And yet here I am in the arms of God, and I'm feeling that same thing except multiplied. Like, you are my child. You are so loved. You are so beloved. And it was a very personal experience, but I also knew that it rippled out to every living soul. Every living soul was that loved, and I'm holding my little boy, and I mean, it was profound. I learned a lot about choice. This was interesting, as I'm in the arms of the divine, which I call God. There's many words. It's funny, I have indigenous native people where I live up in the mountains. And they say, that which is known by 1,000 names and yet remains nameless. And I love that. But here I am in the arms of God, and I'm told, I want you to have your will. And I'm like, my will? I'm like, it's your will be done. I've been taught that since I was a child. It's your will be. And I was told, no. My will is your will. That's how much I love you. My will is that you have free will, that you get to choose. And I was given these scenarios. It's like, you can be mad at God the rest of your life because this happened and was allowed to happen, and there was no divine intervention. And that's okay. We love you anyway. I was told I could beat myself up for the rest of the life of my life. That was my fault, that I was driving the car. And that's okay. That would cause pain to myself. But I was given this third choice. I was told, you can exercise your will and you can give your son to me. You can give him back. You can hand him over. You can trust and let go. And therefore, you won't feel like he was yanked away from you, but you can exercise your will. Because I want you to have free will. That was the communication. And in all that love, in all that beauty and all that peace, I was able to kiss my little boy and hand him over. Just give him back. And then again, whoosh, back into the hospital bed. There I am, back to the amputation and the braces and the colostomy bag and the injuries and all the things that, were broken. And yet my heart was the most broken. My heart was the most broken. And yet I had this new perception. It's like, wow, we are that loved. We are that held. We are that beloved. And we have free will. I can choose to be miserable, or I can choose to heal. I can choose to find joy or create joy. I don't believe we find it. I think we create it. And that was part of the message as I was in those divine arms, is that we are the creators of our life, that I am. That the divine holds us in such love, and we come and experience our life, and nobody had done this to me. It was done for me. And that at some weird cosmic level, I was even the author of it, that my soul wanted to experience this, and then all the players and all the universe supported my experience for my soul's expansion. And, I'd grown up believing that life was a test, that somehow it was a test, and the angels were there keeping score, and I was most likely failing. And even when I had those thoughts in the arms of God, I was told, no, my son, no, my boy, life is not a test. It's a gift. It's a gift. Every day is a joyful gift. With the sunshine on your shoulders, the breeze in your hair, the people around you that love you, and the people you love. It's all a gift. It's a gift. And so there was a lot of profound things that turned what I thought I believed inside out and upside down, but expanded it in such a beautiful way. It's as if my belief or my hope or my faith had been transformed into absolute trust with no judgments, no comparisons. That all went out the window. And yet here I was, in a wheelchair at the time. I was trying to learn how to drive an electric wheelchair. I was going to go home. I was going to keep my word and raise our son. And how was I going to do that? And I became really concerned about him. He had seen me in the hospital, but he was staying with my younger brother and his wife and his cousins, and they just brought him in like he was one of their own. But I thought, I'm going to come home, and what is this going to look like? Like I was the rough and tumble dad that run and throw him in the air, and now I'm in a wheelchair, and I've got all these injuries, and I'm not what I used to be, and how's he going to accept this? How is he going to accept this? And so, it came time for me to come home, and of course my brothers were there, They were there they would have to lift me and put me in the wheelchair. I couldn't get in my own self with one arm and no leg, and they took me to actually my younger brother's house. They took me to my younger brother's house to stay. I still had home health and nurses coming in and physical therapy and all that was going on. And Spencer was there, and I worried about this as we drove up to the house. And, I looked, and here he was looking out the window. He's watching as my brothers, his uncles, lift me, his dad, in the wheelchair. And they had built a ramp so I could drive the wheelchair up into the house, and I began to navigate the wheelchair, and Spencer comes running out the door, and he comes running toward me, and he ran right past me. And I thought, oh, it's too much. All of the injuries, it's too much. I knew he wouldn't accept me. I knew this would be hard for him. This was my thought. And I began to navigate the wheelchair and turn it to go up the ramp. And I just looked to see where he had gone. Like, where'd he go? And I realized he had run across the street, and he began to knock on all the neighbors' doors. And he started to shout, come out, my dad has made it home. You've got to come see my dad. And I burst into tears, and he did run, and he jumped on my lap and it almost killed me. I still had all the sutures, from the abdominal repair. And I began to weep, and I said, look, I'm going to work really hard to get better, but it's going to be like this for a while. Are you going to be okay? And he's a grown man now. He's married. They just made me a grandfather. But here was this little 7-year-old, and he threw his arms around me, and he said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And we both laughed through tears. And I share this for a specific reason, because suddenly here I was in a wheelchair in this realm with my surviving son. And it was no less divine than being in the other realm, holding my son that passed away. Suddenly heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. It was simply to be in that perfect moment and feel the unconditional love of my child, which felt as immense as the unconditional love of God. And I've learned that the little things are the big things. Those little things that are day-to-day little happenstances. People have said to me, oh gosh, your injuries, you must have been spared for some great cause. And I say, yeah, to play catch with my son or to watch one more sunset, or to, sit and listen to him play the guitar or whatever. The little things became the big things, and there's miracles everywhere. There's no small miracles. Everything's a miracle. I see the flowers in the spring, and I'm like, wow, there's a God, and God is in that, and it's not a belief, it's not theology. It's like there is divine, but the big takeaway from me is the divine is within us. We are manifestations of that. When I was held in those arms, that was the big epiphany, which I didn't even know how to talk about. It's like, I am that. And that is me. I am that I am. I'm in God, and God's in me, and we are that, and God is in all of us, and we are God, and there's all these things that sound crazy when I say it, but I experienced it. And so it's not a theory. It's not, a thought. It's not a theology. For me, it was a very profound reality. A profound reality that we are divine. We are manifestations of that. We're having our experience, a human experience, but we're divine beings of light and of truth and of love. And it changed me. I've become different. And yet life continues to throw challenges at us. It's not like, I don't want anyone to think that I had this horrible accident and I had these profound experiences and then I was okay. No. I struggled, I made bad choices, I felt this or that. I had this horrible accident. I had profound experiences. And I grieved and I struggled like anybody else would. And yet here I am, gray-haired and 27 years after the fact. And I've learned a lot, and I continue to learn. In fact, now I embrace the notion, or maybe the truth, we're simply here to learn. That's the whole point. We're here to learn, and we learn by our experiences, and then we make adjustments, and we shift, and we become better, or more aware, or more loving, or more wise, or, maybe even more powerful. Because of it all, not in spite of it all, but because of it all.
It's such a beautiful message, and I have to say, I find it so remarkable that your whole life just changes in an instant. There's a horrible accident, not to mention everything you have to go through health-wise, but all of a sudden your family is fractured. Your wife's no longer here, your son is no longer here, and yet when you most need time to grieve and to be angry, you still have to raise a little boy, and you have to figure out how are you going to do it with being in a wheelchair, with having to deal with all the surgeries and everything that you've had to deal with for 6 months. And I think it was, of course, a big blessing, that you've had these experiences with your wife and then with your son and with God, which probably helped frame this. But I could imagine a person going through this being extremely angry and extremely upset of, why do I need to go through this? Why does my life need to change? Why does it need to be me that's stuck here thinking of the people that I've lost? What was your mental state like? Because of course when you're in the hospital, except for when you're in pain and you're getting a lot of things done, but you have a lot of time to think.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that's the last thing you want to do when you've gone through such a traumatic event. The last thing you want is to be alone with your thoughts, with the what ifs, with the guilt that you've said you felt, with missing the people that were close to you, because even in understanding that they're better off where they are and that they're okay, but you still miss their presence with you. So how did you manage to keep a sane mental state throughout it all?
Wow. I don't know. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm crazy. No, it's beautiful, and you've articulated that so well, because it's life, and there's I got to get up and get to work. I had to learn to walk again. I had to provide. And I was lucky to have good family support and a good job, and my work supported me as well. But it was day by day. I often say I just had to keep breathing. I just had to keep breathing and get to the next breath sometimes, and then maybe the next minute, and then maybe the next hour, and maybe the next day. And I did ask those questions. Why me? Why both of them? Why the leg? Why? And at one point, I shifted the why to what. What am I learning? If the purpose of life is to learn, what am I learning in all this? And what can I do to support others? What can I do? So it shifted out of the why me to the what am I learning, and what can I do with what I'm learning. And that was a profound shift. The anger, yes. There was times I cried out, in fact, I don't profess to get answers to prayers every day, but I do pray. I do voice out things to the universe, and it's different now. After the accident, I've learned to just listen. I used to say profound prayers, and they were very wordy, and now I just shut up and listen. But on one of those nights, when it's like, I was yelling at God saying, what is it you do up there? I mean, how could you just, let this happen? And as I asked the what do you do, the profound answer came in, and it was, I allow. I allow. And as part of that experience, I was told, I allow you to choose. And it was these beautiful words, 2 words. I was told, choose joy. And it's almost like I'm thick-headed. It's like, look, I held you. I told you you have free will. I let you make a choice. You can still make the choice every day, but by all means, choose joy. Yes, you're suffering. Yes, you're hurting. Yes, this is traumatic. And yes, it's expanding your soul in ways that are unfathomable. And you get to take that with you. But choose joy. Make a choice and choose to be happy. Choose to be joyful. And that was interesting, you know. And I still struggle with that. I mean, I hear myself say these things, and yeah, I've had these profound experiences, and sometimes I still struggle. I don't want to be happy today. I'm not choosing joy today. But I allow the emotions to be. We have so much judgment about our emotions. Well, I'm angry, and that's bad. Well, is it? Maybe it's perfect for your soul to be angry today and to experience that, and that's okay. Or I am joyful today, or gosh, I'm jealous today, or I'm hurt today, or I'm, melancholy today. We tend to say, well, when I'm happy, that's good, and when I'm sad, that's bad. We put judgments on everything. And my experience in the arms of the divine was, well, it was that. Judge not. It's like, experience it. Be with it. Be grateful that you know what sorrow feels like. Because how would you know intense bliss had you not had the opposite of intense sorrow or grief? And so in the end, it's all love. It's all a blessing. And I can say that. But yeah, I still have my days. We're having the human experience, Sabrina, and it's challenging, and it's sometimes difficult, and yet it does expand our soul. It does expand our soul.
It sure does. Even though I can imagine a lot of times we would wish we wouldn't go through all that growth and learning.
Yeah, it's like, no, don't want it. Don't want it. I firmly believe, and it's interesting, there's things I hope for, there's things I believe, then there's things I know. This is a belief. I believe, because of what I experienced, someday we will gather, we'll fall in each other's arms and we'll weep tears of joy and sorrow and say, wow, that was a trip. That was a trip. And we'll have the conversation. I have had dreams and visions, if you will, where my loved ones have shown up, I mean, Tamara is my guardian angel. I've had dreams of her. I've gone through intense times of struggle and pain and even self-judgment where, well, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? I was really in a dark place one time. I mean, there was times I had been suicidal. I mean, yeah, and so I have no judgment of that. I've been there. But it was on one of these nights, and I did manage to get myself into bed and thought, I'm just going to sleep on this. And as I slept, she came to me in a dream. And she's always so glorious, so beautiful, so magnificent. Here I am in my stuff, in my pain, in my self-judgments. But in this dream or this vision, if you will, she comes to me and she's dancing. She's joyfully dancing. And she wrapped her arms around my neck and she danced around me and she kissed me. And then she looked at me and she verbally said to me, she said, all that exists here is wisdom. And then she pulled back and I was looking right in her eyes, and this was nonverbal communication. She looked at me and the message was just sent. She said, it doesn't matter what you did or what you didn't do or the trauma you're going through. All that exists here is wisdom. You get to take that wisdom with you. It's all part of your growth. And again, I had this biblical verse, I don't know that I'm even that biblical anymore, but I'd grown up that way. And that was this verse about casting your burdens away and they would be turned to light, or they would become light. And I thought, well, that's less heavy. But I realized as I was looking in her beautiful eyes and she's communicating this thing is that, oh, wow, so my burdens, my troubles will become light. in that they'll be illuminated. They'll be transformed to wisdom. They'll become my knowing. and therefore, that was her joy. That was her peace. That was her bliss, is she was communicating that in her realm, where she is, there's only wisdom. There's only light. It's all the judgments that I put on it that make it not so. And so that was, that was one little snippet of an experience, but they've been very near. I've experienced dreams, visions, whispers. Interesting enough, Griffin, my little son that passed as a toddler, he's come to me as a grown young man in dreams. And he's magnificent. I mean, it's like, well, and I don't know. I'm not pretending that he was a toddler in heaven. I think the universe is so kind. The universe knew I needed to hold my little boy, And so this whole thing with the crib may have been a gift. He's come to me since. In fact, and life does go on. I mean, I was asked to speak at the local high school. And they asked me to speak on motivation, how to take on life with tenacity and, this thing. And, I'm the guy with one leg that's going to get up and talk about overcoming challenges, right? And I went down to the high school, and I went early, and it's interesting because there I sat and I was thinking about what I wanted to say. And I was thinking about the accident and how long I had been on a prosthetic limb. And I started counting the years up. And like I said, I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I didn't realize this. I started counting the years up, and I thought, wow, it's been 17 years. Oh my gosh. This would be his graduating class. He would have gone to this local high school. Here I am speaking to the kids and the young people that would have been his girlfriend, and his teammates. And I had this overwhelming feeling, first of shame that I didn't remember, that I hadn't done the math. And then this beauty, this joy that, wow, these are the kids that would have been his friends. I'm speaking to the ones that, the girl would have been his first kiss. She's going to be there. I'm going to be talking to her. I mean, all these things. And I was overcome with this joy, and I felt him. I didn't see him, but I felt him sitting right there with me. And again, when I feel them close, there's always communication, and he was communicating, "Yup, it would have been a big day for us tonight, Dad. I'm still here. I'm watching. I'm aware. I'm connected to you. And here my dad gets to speak to the kids that would have been my teammates and my girlfriends." And I couldn't hardly hold back the tears. My speech was much different. I didn't necessarily talk about tenacity. I leaned into the eternal nature of their souls. And I said, you don't have to be a believer or not a believer. I'm not here with an agenda to convince anybody of anything. But I know we're divine. And I know even if you believe in nothing, that we're biological organisms and we die and that's it. I said, leave a legacy of love. Leave a legacy of peace. Leave a legacy of wisdom and of joy and of power, which is love. Love is the most powerful thing in the universe. So embrace that. And anyway, the speech was much different, but yeah, these things have happened in my life that are years past the accident, where I get these little winks from heaven and these dreams or these visions or these visitations where suddenly it's like, wow, I'm sitting right here with my son. He would have been 18. He would have been one of those kids, and this has all been orchestrated for my healing. And it's been an incredible journey.
Oh, I can imagine. And I was just thinking what a blessing and how beautiful it is that you get these moments to feel your wife, your son, even though they're not in this world anymore, but that they still come to you at times, and that you're reminded of them, and that you feel their love and their presence. I think it's so beautiful for everybody that has lost somebody that they love. It's amazing that you're still able to experience their energy every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're connected. I believe we always will be. And yeah, however that works, a parallel universe, they may be off living other lives in a reincarnate. I don't know. I don't know those answers, but I know we're connected. And I know that the time we share and the people we choose in this life to share it with, there's a soul connection. There's a soul family, if you will. It might not be blood family, but the people that are in our lives are there. And it is in divine order. And within the divine order, there's always free will and choice. And that's the cosmic contradiction, perhaps. It's all outlined, and yet we get to choose, It's interesting.
It sure is. Now, I want to ask you about grief. Because not only do we deal with our own grief, but in your case, you had a 7-year-old that probably was developed enough to understand what was happening, but it wouldn't make it any easier to realize mom's not coming back, dad is different than how he used to be before. I'm not quite sure how he will be in the future, but life just all of a sudden looks very differently. And whilst you're dealing with your own grief, you have to manage the feelings of a 7-year-old that has lost his mom and his baby brother. And I know that this topic is very central to your heart because you've written a book together with your son Spencer about this. So would you mind sharing your thoughts on grief and how can we manage it with our children when somebody in the family passes away?
Wow, that's a beautiful question. And it's so true. I mean, here I had this profound near-death, out-of-body experience. This was the anchor that I held on to. Spencer didn't. He was 7 years old. His mom died. His little brother died. His dad died in many ways. He lost me. I mean, I was never going to be the same. And he didn't have any of those profound experiences. He had to navigate this as a child. And grief. And it's interesting. He was so strong for me when here he was my little boy, and he was so strong and so courageous. And yet when he got a little bit older, he was probably a young adult, 18, 19, 20 years old. And we had this conversation. He's like, Dad, I don't get it. He's like, you had these profound experiences, but I never got anything. He's like, I beat my knuckles bloody on this thing you call God, this thing you call prayer. And that door never opened. My mom died. My little brother died. I never had a dream or a vision or a feeling. I never got to visit. I never got to say goodbye. And he said, either you're deceived in some crazy way, or maybe you're making it up. I'm like, Or he said, if there's some divine greater power, it doesn't care about me. He's like, Dad, I begged just to see my mom, just once, in a dream or anything. And anyway, he was in this turmoil, this crisis, maybe an expansion. He was playing in a rock and roll band. I mean, he was doing great. He was in college. But I would go to the shows and I could see the pain. He was just expressing. And yet I went home that night and I mentioned, I pray. I said, look, God, I'll give it all away. Give him something. Give him something to hold on to. I'll trade out my experiences. And this was one of those profound nights when I did get an answer. And the answer was, why do you think your experience is better than his? It's like, Jeff, are you judging again? It was like, don't you know I've got him? You had the perfect experience for the expansion of your soul, and he's having the perfect experience for the expansion of his soul. And they're different. It doesn't have to look alike. And I was told in a profound way, your job, Dad, is to love him unconditionally. And I knew I had experienced the unconditional love of God, and I thought, well, gosh, in my human form, can I really do that? He might go to jail. I mean, there's, the band is breaking up. There was drugs involved. I mean, he could go to jail. And the divine said, perfect. Then that's the perfect experience for the expansion of his soul. Your job is to love him. And I've decided to just love. And he turned out so magnificent. His beliefs are different than my beliefs, but beliefs are just beliefs. His truth is, and he actually came to me with this, he said, Dad, maybe I'm God's light. Maybe I'm God's hands. Maybe the only person here that can, so, I mean, he did after school, music programs for struggling teens. He was in Big Brother, Big Sister, which is a program here in the U.S. where, someone that's older and well-grounded can reach out and support young people that don't have a father or don't have siblings. And anyway, he turned out, he's the most compassionate man I know. And he's kind and he's good. And this is where he came to me and said, Dad, let's write a book together. Some guys fish, some guys work on cars or go golfing. He's like, let's do a book. And so we wrote this book on grief. And it's not a religious book. In fact, when he was little, the thing that made him most angry is when people would say, your mom's in a better place. I mean, he's like, no, she's not. The best place for her to be is in the kitchen holding me. I mean, he was, that didn't work for him. And I see the wisdom in that. So he said, hey, if there's kids that are struggling, let's do a children's book. And we put together this book, and it's beautiful, and it's on grief. And it talks about, the book is titled, Where Are You? Where are you? It's written from that innocent 7-year-old perspective, like, where are you? I've looked in the kitchen. I looked in the garden. I've looked in the stars. Where are you? You're nowhere to be found. But it comes around in this beautiful way where he realizes, I get emotional talking about it. He realizes that you live on in me, because I'm here. And the way I live my life is how I honor you, no matter what you believe. You live on in me, and because you're alive in me, you're alive in everything. Now I do feel you in the kitchen and see you in the stars and see you in the garden. He's had this profound awakening, spiritual, not religious, And the conclusion is that our grief, is the most magnificent form of love. It's the most profound manifestation of love. We grieve because we love. And it's a beautiful little book. Where Are You? It's available on Amazon. And we collaborated on that. And it's been really healing and really fun. We thought we were writing a children's book. We found out it's been embraced by anybody who misses someone. It became an international #1 bestseller. We were doing it as a hobby. We had no expectations. He was so good with the book. Like, I thought it was his story. I said, well, we've got to illustrate this. I'm going to find a child that maybe looked like you, and we'll find people that, and he said, Dad, it's not my story. This is humanity's story. He said, please, let's have every gender and every race and everything portrayed and illustrated in this book, because it's not my story. It's the story of humanity. It's the story of grief, and it's the story of healing and awakening. And we had fun. Anyway, thank you for letting me plug that. Where Are You? By Jeffery and Spencer Olsen on Amazon.
It's so beautiful. And I have to say, Jeff, you're such a wonderful human being. And I'm pretty sure you've lived in this lifetime as for 100 lifetimes. And it really amazes me, and I find it so remarkable that you're still able to see the beauty in life and the joy in it and the divine order. And I can imagine on some days it's more difficult to find than in others, but you keep believing in it. And I think that's so wonderful. And all I wish for myself is that in the moments that I'm struggling, that I think of you and of how you've managed to move forward in times where probably you couldn't imagine how you were able to move forward, and think, well, this would be all right, this is going to be just fine. Now, I want to ask you, why do you share your story? And the reason why I ask this is because I'm very much aware that it takes a lot of emotion. It makes you relive moments that you would rather not relive. It makes you relive thoughts, feelings that you would rather not. And I think there's a lot of value and benefit to everybody else that has not had this experience, to listen to your lessons, to listen to your thoughts, and it makes our lives better. But I want to know from your perspective, why do you feel you have to, why do you contribute to this?
You ask such great questions. I never wanted to share my story. I didn't want to talk about it publicly. In fact, I went a decade and only my family and closest friends even knew what had happened. And I say the doctor, Jeff O'Driscoll, became one of my closest friends because then I could share with him and say, well, I had something really interesting happen. I had a neighbor, wonderful woman, and she came to me and she said, something happened to you, didn't it? And I said, well, yeah, but I don't talk about it. And she said, well, I want you to talk about it. There's a guy that I want to introduce you to. He works at the university, and maybe it would be a good thing. So anyway, she introduced me, and I told her what had happened, and we cried, and she said, this is amazing. You've got to share this, because this fellow was a researcher. He studied what does a Buddhist experience as opposed to a Christian, or what does an atheist experience as opposed to a Muslim. I mean, he was just simply researching. But when I shared what had happened to me with him, he said, you've got to talk to our group. And I'm like, no, I don't know. I don't talk about this in public. He says, oh no, these people are grieving. They've lost loved ones. Some of them are in late stage cancer. They're getting ready to pass. So I've agreed to come and speak to the group, and it was a small group. There was maybe 100 people there. But this guy came up in the back and he said, you're going to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not. I said, I have no interest. I mean, I'm crying. I'm trying to share this story. And it had been 10 years after the fact. And anyway, there was a book contract in my email the following Monday. That was a Friday. On Monday, And again, I went to the source. I went to the creator. I said, wow, I don't know what to do. There's this contract in my email. Give me something. Give me some direction here. And I don't really want to write a book. I don't want to put myself out there. There was many barriers. I didn't want people to think I was crazy. I didn't want people to think that I thought I was special in any way, because I don't. We're all special, and yet no one's special. And there was this huge barrier. It's like, if I sign this contract, could I really collect a royalty check on a book written about the story that took the lives of half my family and I was driving the car? I mean, can I collect money for that? There was a lot of barriers to push through. So I went back to the scene of the accident and I prayed. I asked God, I said, look, there's this thing, what do I do? And I got an answer this day too. I've shared maybe in our visit the 3 most profound times I've got answers to prayers, but I was told, share your experience and others will heal. And so to answer your question finally with all that context, I share this story because I was told that others will heal. And when I realized it has nothing to do with me, it may be my experience, but if others will heal and learn from it, then that's why I share it. That's why I have opened up. And I had no idea. I thought, okay, I'll write the book, And I thought, who cares? My mom will buy a copy. I mean, nobody's going to buy this thing. But I wrote the book, and gosh, it was released, and it hit number 3 on Amazon in the category immediately. And then suddenly there was all these invites all over the world to speak. I got to present in Amsterdam on 2 occasions. I love the Netherlands. Beautiful country, beautiful people. So all of a sudden, my life had been transformed in this crazy way, which was in divine order, even if I didn't want it. And I still don't. I'm kind of reclusive. I've moved back on the farm. But I share this story because others will heal. If there's something in there that someone gains from, or can learn from, or can heal from, or can navigate through grief from, then that's the reason. That's the reason I share it.
And I promise you they do. I always read comments, and I can often not believe how many people find healing and find solace and hope after being through challenging events, and after losing somebody they love, or sometimes they're dealing with a disease that just doesn't seem to have an answer, that just keeps getting worse and worse. And I feel that people like you opening up and sharing these very vulnerable moments, it allows the rest of us to connect to your story, and I think it gives us hope. So I want to thank you for everything that you do, and I want to thank you for being vulnerable, for sharing your story as it is. I know, and I always say this, it's never easy to share and to talk about it, no matter how many times you've done it. So thank you for allowing us to open this story up and to talk about it today. Now, for everybody that wants to connect with you and that is looking for your books, where can they find you, and where can they find your books?
Oh, that's so good. And thank you for your kindness, for your comments, for your light. What a beautiful thing. Thank you. Wow, I can be found, and I like I say, I'm kind of reclusive, but my books are on Amazon. Knowing by Jeffery Olsen is the personal memoir with all the near-death experiences and the aftermath. Where Are You by Jeffery and Spencer Olsen is the children's book, also on Amazon. I do have an Instagram account. It's Jeffery C. Olsen, and Jeffery is Jeffery. C, that's my middle initial, Olsen, Olsen. Or you can reach me through the website. That's probably the best place, and that is Envoy Publishing, ENVOY publishing.com, and the books are available there. There's videos, there's a little contact button, and you can push that. And I actually still read and look at all the personal emails and do my best to get back to people.